Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Test Prep Time Live with Method Test Prep. My name is Oliver Luisi. I'm the Director of Tutoring here at Method, and today we're going to look at a common concept on the English or writing and language sections of the SAT or ACT. Also just a really critical idea in your writing, essay writing, expository writing, and as you navigate reading comprehension. Transitions can be really important signposts along the way, mainly as you're shifting from an idea to another idea or connecting ideas. I want to talk for just a few minutes about what transitions are and the way you'll likely see transitions either on the standardized tests or in an essay or reading selection. And transitions can be a little challenging at first, so you want to take your time with these, understand the different parts, and really practice the method that we suggest as a simple way to answer these questions. First, I want to keep things pretty simple. We don't have to understand every last exception. We know the English language can be somewhat complicated. We just want to focus on the simplest way to understand these sentences and transitions. Now, when I say transition, what I'm really focusing on is a transition is a word or a phrase that serves as a link or a connection between ideas. That's all a transition is doing. It's linking or connecting two different ideas, usually one before and one after the transition. There are some common types of transition. Addition, you're adding more of the same thing from the first idea. Comparison, you're highlighting what's similar. Contrast, you're highlighting what's different. And cause and effect, the first idea is the reason or the cause of the second idea. So you can look out for those common types when you get to transition questions. The key is going to be this. You have to spend a little bit of time looking around the transition, look a little bit before for the idea that comes previously, and then look a little bit after for the idea that comes just after the transition. You're ultimately going to ask yourself, how are these two ideas connected or related? What do they have to do with each other? That will help you understand what type of transition or connection you need. You're going to have to know a little bit or learn or understand a little bit about the paragraph or the sentences to get the meaning and the context. It's not going to be enough here just to go for the answer that sounds best. That might fool us sometimes if we go just for the one that sounds best. Okay, a couple of key ideas as we explore transitions. Transitions really are meant to give sentences or paragraphs logic and flow. It allows you to connect ideas in a way that makes it flow very well, and it's organized in a logical way. We want to try and make that transition smoothly, especially if you're exploring different ideas. You're trying to connect them in a way that allows them to make sense together. Now, some of those common things that transitions are doing are they're connecting the meanings between two paragraphs or two sentences or two ideas. They might be signaling shifts, as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes a transition is indicating that we were talking about one thing, but now we're going to shift slightly to a related but somewhat different topic. The right transition is always about the context, and so we're going to have to look for clues in the context and the words and sentences around it, and the relationship between different parts of a sentence and different sentences within a paragraph. A really important skill here on transition questions is to become very skilled at looking for transition words and phrases. You can start to pick up on these and notice when they come up on a question, and then you'll get much more skilled at finding out those transition questions when you come upon them. We'll look at a few examples in a moment, but just to give you the basics of what I'm speaking of when I talk about transitions, I want to look at a couple of quick examples here, okay? So in the blue, you can see I've created some sentences here and I've used different transitions. Let's take a quick look. In the first example, I studied chemistry in college as my first idea. So I went to college, I studied chemistry. The next sentence is, my brother studied chemistry in college as well. So I'm highlighting what's similar here. Although it's my brother and myself, we're different people, we actually both went to college and studied chemistry. So I'm using the transition similarly. Similarly here is indicating that the first idea and the second idea are connecting very similar ideas. Okay, so this sentence and this sentence are connected with a very similar idea. Likewise, similarly, that would be comparison. In this next example, example number 2, we see I went to college in New York, and then the next idea is that my cousin attended a California college. So the transition I want here is actually, however, as a contrast. I'm saying the connection now between these two sentences is one of contrast. I'm highlighting what's different. We both went to college, but I was in New York, and my cousin, she was in California. Lastly, in the third example, I want to pursue a PhD. The next idea is, in order to do that part, I'm going to first need to complete my undergraduate program. Oops, misspelling here. Undergraduate program. Or my master's, or my MA. Keep it simple. In any case, the second idea is a requirement for the first. So in order to do the first idea, I need, therefore, to do the second. And this is cause and effect. Okay, so just 3 quick examples of the types of transitions you might see. Here's a fuller list of phrases to look for and types of transitions that may come up. So as you look through these, if you're familiar with some of these, great. But the ones that you're less familiar with, make sure you understand those more and spend some time pinning down the idea or the definition of these words, right? Often a transition is just continuing the first idea, and that could be addition with words like furthermore, in addition to, moreover, what's more, subsequently. That's just adding more of the same thing. As we saw just previously, similarly and likewise is comparing what's similar. I'm highlighting the similarities between two ideas. Another common one we saw was cause and effect, right? Thus or therefore, as a result, consequently, accordingly. And an example could also be a continuing idea. I give you an idea, and then I just want to give you some specific examples of that to help you out, to help you understand. So an example would be, for example, for instance. And less common, but sometimes emphasis is just saying indeed or certainly to add like an added emphasis or sort of an exclamation point on the first idea. I'm putting an even more emphatic second idea, usually leading with words like indeed or certainly. Now on the contrast side, this is when the two ideas are very different, so I want to highlight what's different. And it's sort of a contradiction, right? So it's saying, first idea, okay, but, however, let's look at a different second idea. Nevertheless, nonetheless, most of these words just mean, despite the first idea, we're going to shift and look at a different idea in the second part. Could also be a contrast of opposites. So in contrast or on the other hand. So this is a good list to look at and get familiar with these types of words and phrases. These are probably the most common that show up on the SAT or ACT, and probably the most common that you'll come across in general. Okay, a couple of important things, and we're going to go through a few examples to show you how this works. But quickly, I want to get a great method for answering transition questions. I want to have the same steps I do each time so I can get into a rhythm and know whenever I come across a transition question, I can count on these steps or this method. First, realize it's a transition question. And how do you do that? By recognizing transition words and phrases in the answer choices, right? If I see answers that say however, therefore, nevertheless, consequently, 99% of the time, that's going to be a transition question. First, go to that transition in the paragraph or the sentence. You want to block it out because it might be the wrong one, but you can use that as your marker. Then you want to start reading a little bit before, maybe a sentence or two before the transition to get the first idea. Then you want to read a sentence or two after the transition to get the second idea. Okay, so again, we have idea number 1, then a transition, and then idea number 2. And that's what we want to discover on transition questions. We want to take a few moments, slow down a little bit, go find idea number 1, go find idea number 2, and then consider the transition in the middle. Once you get the 2 ideas, compare them, understand their connection. Is it a contrast? Is it a comparison? Is it a cause and effect? As some examples. If you look at the answer choices and you realize you have words like therefore and thus as an example, these mean exactly the same thing. They're both cause and effect. Therefore, you can cross them both off. You might be able to narrow the choices just based on the category, right? If you know it's not a contrast, get rid of any contrast words. But be careful. A good final step is to reread the sentences with the choice you determined was correct to make sure it sounds good and it also is logical. All right, let's jump in and take a look at a few quick examples. Okay, I get to this question on the test. Best option for the underlined portion, and I notice furthermore, nevertheless, therefore, these are all transitions. I'm definitely working on a transition question. That's the step 1. Next, I'm going to go find the transition they give me. I'm going to block it out for a moment. You can put your hand over it to sort of ignore it. The point being is this might not be correct and I don't want it to confuse me. If I read it with just this transition in, I might get a little bit confused here. Let's always begin by going before the transition a sentence or 2. This isn't a long paragraph, so I think picking up on some of the ideas here, even if it's a sentence or 2, can be helpful. Several species known as extremophiles occupy Earth's most inhospitable environments. The bacteria's natural habitats, volcanic craters that can reach thousands of degrees of Fahrenheit, seafloor regions where pressures could crush solid steel, and geyser mouths whose pH is akin to that of stomach acid, would quickly kill most other organisms. So they're talking about all these conditions which seem to be really bad for most organisms. They'll quickly kill most organisms. So if I want to simplify that first idea, bacteria live in places where most other living things die. Next idea, skip the transition, go to the second idea. Extremophiles survive amidst forbidding conditions. So they just describe those conditions and saying that these extremophiles, again, these bacteria, somehow survive. They've evolved unique physical and biochemical traits for surviving and adapting. Okay, so most organisms would die, transition. These bacteria, extremophiles, survive. They live. Keep it as simple as you need to. If others are dying and these live, I need some type of contrast, right? Those are very different things, being alive and not being alive. Let's go to the choices. I want to contrast idea 1 with idea number 2. Okay. Therefore represents a cause and effect. Therefore would say that those bad environments that kill most other organisms, those are the reason or the cause of why extremophiles survive. That's not true. We don't want A. Next is beyond this. Now, beyond this is simply saying whatever idea you just had, we're going to go a little bit further than that. But the second idea is not a further beyond the first idea. It's just a contrast, once again, between being eliminated or surviving. So I don't want beyond this. In the next example, I have furthermore. This is very similar to beyond this, right? I'm just adding more stuff, more. It's addition. That's not what I want. Aha. I want nevertheless, choice D. Nevertheless is definitely a contrast word. After they list all the bad conditions, forbidding conditions that kill most other organisms, the next idea is that the extremophiles survive. Nevertheless, meaning even though I had all these bad conditions, these bacteria still survive. So nevertheless is the correct transition here. Let's look at a second example. And here, it's going to be important to always understand the larger context or the main idea. So between these two connections, we need to understand a little bit more. Again, I have a transition question based on the answer choices. I recognize transition words. I'm going to go to the one they give me. I'm going to block it out for a moment. I'm going to go back to the ideas just before this. It looks like there's a number of surviving World War II soldiers, and the number was quickly declining. Most of those who fought in the war would have been well into their 80s, if not older. Suvitsky anticipated that having these veterans in a central place would be a boon to her research, which included documenting the lives and views of those who were born between 1900 and 1920. Here it says we sit down with these folks and record anything they're willing to share about their lives. They provide rich keys to understanding the past. So they want to meet with these older war veterans and record their conversations. As the recording sessions begin, the group experienced difficulties. And many of the veterans were hesitant to discuss their experience. Others seemed to be constantly interrupted. You would think old people wouldn't have a lot to do, but that's actually not true by any means. So they were hesitant to share, or they were busy and had other obligations. So this first paragraph and a couple of sentences seem to focus on how interviewing or speaking with these veterans would, all in one place, would be a boon or a positive to the research. In the next paragraph or sentences, after the transition, we realized that there were some difficulties. It sounded good in the first paragraph. It sounded like a good plan, but now there's some difficulties. So we've had a shift to negative, okay? What do I want here? In between the positive and the negative, we want to contrast these ideas. Again, we want a contrast word here. Is that consequently? No. Consequently is cause and effect. As a consequence, the first idea is the reason for the second idea. Moreover, this is an additional, right? More of the same. So in addition is not what I want. Something shifted here. Something changed from positive to negative. Choice C, however. Okay, this is the contrast, right? However, that looks like the right answer. And it looks like we had a good plan to interview the veterans. However, as the sessions began, the group experienced some difficulties. That's the correct contrast. Now, if you look at choice D, this is also somewhat of a contrast on the other hand, but this would have to be used because I had one example first, and then I used a totally different example on the second idea. So I'd have to be sort of contrasting in a comparison way between two things. That doesn't work in this particular example. However, is the more exact contrast I need. Let's try one more example to finish up. Select the best option for the underlined portion. I can see transition words once again. Let's go back to the paragraph. Let's find the transition. Let's block it off. Let's go to the ideas just before. For millennia, societies have used various forms of currency to assign value, to trade goods, artistic works, practical objects, food, and many other items that were exchanged. Metals, okay, so my first idea is people had currency. They used different currency to assign value for exchanging goods and services. Now I want to transition and come to my second idea. What's my second idea? Metals were used as a form of money in ancient Mesopotamia, while different wampum were used, a string of beads, by Native Americans trading with early European colonists. What did they just give me here? They talked about currency different currencies for assigning value. And then they talked about some examples. Metals used in Mesopotamia, wampum used by Native Americans in America. These are all examples. How am I going to get from my first ideas to my second? Well, I need something emphasizing examples. As I can see from my choices very directly, it's for example. Still is a contrast idea. It says even though. Still just means even though. In addition, the other choices you can see have contrast again in choice C, and subsequently is cause and effect. All right? So here, I definitely want for example. And a last little tip before we jump off, be careful on some transition questions and make sure a transition is needed at all. Just because it's a transition question doesn't mean you're going to need any transition. In fact, in this example, we go and find the transition, block it off, and it says first idea, number 1. Once an anxious home buyer brings the dog home, there will be a honeymoon period that lasts for several days to a week. A honeymoon period. The next idea is that this period is a period in which the owner and the dog are cautiously getting acquainted, and which the owner should begin to lay the foundation for training ahead. What did they just give us? It seems like it was just a definition of what the honeymoon period is. Do I want fortunately? Nope. Do I want nevertheless? Contrast? Nope. Do I want however? Another contrast? No. I want choice D because I don't want any transition. I just want to start the next sentence. It's defining what the honeymoon period is. This is a period. So I don't need any transition here, and none of the transitions work. So just be careful on those, because once in a while they do this on the transition questions where you're working really hard to find the transition only to discover one's not needed. Once again, transitions are connections linking two ideas. You want to go find the transition, block it off, go to the idea before to find idea number 1, sentences or 2 above, then go for a sentence or 2 after and find idea number 2. Once you have those 2 ideas, you have to connect or relate them using familiar or common transitions such as comparison, contrast, cause and effect, as a few examples. All right, this is a common question on the SAT and ACT, and just a common concept that'll come up a lot in your expository writing. Hopefully that was helpful for today and can allow you to focus in on these and pick up a few points on the tests. We'll be doing a fuller test prep time this afternoon, half an hour class from 1 to 1:30. We'll do it all week this week and in next week and going into May as well. Starting next week, we're also going to add an evening class at 8 p.m. That's an hour long from 8 to 9 p.m. where we're going to get a little more in depth on certain topics. You can visit Test Prep Time Plus on our website to find out more about that schedule and the upcoming classes. We also have full-length classes starting all the time where you can learn every strategy and concept on the SAT and ACT. We do private tutoring for the tests as well as academic tutoring if you need help for AP exams or other academic subjects. And feel free to reach out to us anytime. Happy to answer any questions you might have about these exams or just general academic help. Again, my name was Oliver. I hope this was helpful for you guys. We'll be on this week at 11 a.m. for our Facebook Live class, 15-minute tips. Hopefully you can join us later on this week as well. I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks.